Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to be doing an artist talk here on this beautiful rainy Sunday in the spring. We are today talking with Peter Jemison, whose art we have in our Foreman and Camaros galleries today, and he will be speaking with Jamie Jacobs. So just so you all know, Peter Jemison is a multimedia artist. He is also Seneca of the Heron Clan, and his career spans decades and nations, influencing generations of contemporary Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists alike. Peter currently serves as the historic site manager of the Ganondagan State Historic Site, which is the location of a 17th century Seneca town in Victor, identified as a National Historic Landmark and listed on the National Register of Historic Places. He is also the representative for the Seneca Nation of Indians on the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which is also known as NAGPRA. He is also a member of the Board of Trustees for the National Museum of the American Indian. Also, Jamie Jacobs is Tonawanda Seneca. He was born and raised on the Tonawanda Seneca territory, located about 40 miles east of Rochester. He is of the Turtle Clan, and his father is a member of the Ganondagan Nation and of the Snipe Clan. He currently works at the Rochester Museum and Science Center as a co-curator of the Rock Foundation collections, where he's worked since 2006. He has an associate's degree in criminal justice and also graduated from the Harley-Davidson Technical Institute in 2002 as an entry-level Harley-Davidson technician. He produces traditional works of art that are representative of Seneca historic use of porcupine quills. And recently he won the Best of Show award in the prestigious art show sponsored by Ganondagan Historical Site. He has been doing traditional quill work since 2013 and researches historical pieces on methods of construction and design. He uses these methods for inspiration in his work and mixes in designs of his own in order to create pieces that have the DNA of his ancestors as well as himself. His goal is to honor them by keeping their inspiration alive for further generations. Peter and Jamie, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lauren. I just unmuted myself there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start my video, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Peter.
To begin, HAYA DAHA HODI, Artist Talk. That's really the title that we gave this talk in our language, Onondaga Gowano. And I want to send greetings to each of you. Nawaskanot Swagwego. I give thanks that each of you are well, and greetings and peace and health to you. So I'm going to talk about my work that's included in an exhibit at the Memorial Art Gallery currently, and then I will include some other pieces that are not included in that show, but help to explain my influence by our traditional art, such as bags. The bags that were beaded in some cases, and bags that were made with the use of porcupine quill for decoration. And so it's kind of important that I background, what I'm going to say by mentioning that. Can we see the next slide, please? This one is entitled Free Use and Enjoyment, and it was done quite recently, about 2019. And I come from a community known as Irving, and Irving is right on the border of the Cattaraugus Reservation and White Land, and we're separated by the Cattaraugus Creek that flows right through this part of the community. And as well, there are two different sets of railroad tracks that flow right across our territory. There are a lot of roads that lead into this area, like 5 and 20, for example, major highways going east and west, and the New York State Thruway. And I grew up on a road called Buffalo Road. And it was literally the road you took to go to Buffalo. It also had another name called Dyke Road. And that was because whenever the creek flooded, the road I lived on served as a dike to keep the rest of the town from getting underwater by the action of the creek. It's more like the size of a river, even though it's referred to as a creek. What this is really about is Irving is now situated on land that is not part of the Seneca Nation. But originally, it was part of land that was guaranteed to us by the Canandaigua Treaty of 1794. And this is a kind of a comment on the fact that this land is now viewed as not being part of ours, but really since 1794, the United States government actually recognized all of this territory, all of Western New York, as Seneca territory for our free use and enjoyment. And you can imagine how long that actually lasted. It was about a year before they started buying land of ours, and there were all kinds of shenanigans. One of the things that kind of separates between the railroad and 5 and 20, you see a kind of a white strip there. That's actually treaty cloth. That's what the federal government still gives us annually, a cloth that is a muslin, and we're entitled to 1 yard of that. It comes to our nations in bolts, and this is part of the original treaty, part of the Canandaigua Treaty. So since 1794, they have been giving us cloth as part of the agreement. Before that time, I mean, around that time, there were many more things that were part of this, but today it's come down to treaty cloth. As a child, we referred to it as nudie goods because we heard our family members calling it annuity goods, and we really didn't know what that meant at the time. Anyway, this is a kind of a piece that includes many of my family members and my sons and my nephew, and it's just kind of, you know, a memory of growing up in this place called Irving, where at that time of my youth, it was a big attraction because we had a general store with a post office and all kinds of, you know, things like dry goods, cheese, cold cuts, all of that could be bought in this store. Okay, next slide, please. So this title is called Seneca Bag. And this bag, I found someplace in my research, and, you know, I would get into the back room of various museums to see what they didn't have on display, because sometimes the best stuff was actually not on display. And this bag really caught my attention when I found it. And so I recreated it, the design from it, on a paper bag, because I was working on paper bags. And I was using paper bags because they were so common at the time. And I used to travel back. I lived in New York City at this time. I lived in Brooklyn, actually. And I used to have to commute into Manhattan to go to work. And I observed that the most common thing that united us all was that people carried some type of a bag, whether it was a briefcase or whether it was a plastic bag or a bag from a department store or a lunch bag or whatever it was. And so I began to see the bag as a way to the concept of recycling and the idea that this is something, I think the term is ubiquitous. Everybody has one or will have one in their hand. And so I used this design from a Seneca bag, and I know I elaborated a little bit more from what I really saw, but these were kind of the aesthetic. A black background with lighter colored beads on it, you know, bead and a certain size of bead, and with ribbon trim around the edge. And so this, you know, this aesthetic I really enjoyed and really liked and wanted to kind of copy it. Next slide, please. And I always enjoyed as well to get bags from different stores and then to put my touch on that bag. So there was kind of a famous, well, it was a grocer, a green grocer, but they had coffee, they had everything, upscale stuff, you know, you get the finest caviar there. place called Dean and DeLuca. And they were located for a while at the corner of Prince and Broadway. So on one of my trips to New York, you know, after I had left New York City and was living at Ganondagan, which began in 1985, I picked up a bag, brought it home, and eventually got to work on it. And right now, as I look out my window, the red-winged blackbirds are landing on my bird feeders because it's spring of the year. This is when these guys show up. So it kind of tells me that this bag was probably created in the spring of 1989 when the red-winged birds were around again, and the crows are around kind of year-round, but it's a particular time when the red-winged blackbirds shows up. So again, here's the bag, you know, from a store. I'm kind of recycling and making it into a piece of art. Okay, next slide. There used to be a store here in the mall, the Eastview Mall, called Kaufman's. Later on, it became Macy's. And again, another symbol of spring is the pike, the northern pike. You know, especially I've seen them in the Allegheny River. And Allegheny River is part of our territory too, on the southern tier of New York State. And they're really they're pretty vicious fish, actually. They can really attack game fish, but they themselves are really amazing looking because they're so silver in color, really, and they're big. They get really big. So they're kind of just interesting to see, and people, you know, sometimes catch them almost by accident. They're maybe fishing for bass, but these guys are in the river and they'll hit whatever you might have as bait. So anyway, the morning glories and the pike, again, maybe the morning glories are a little bit later on in the season, but again, I'm thinking in terms of sort of seasonality. That's kind of a bit about this, what this piece is about. And also tying it into, you know, something that is part of our way of life, you know, fishing on the river. Next slide, please. This bag is owned by Memorial Art Gallery. And this is like literally a view looking out the window from my office at Ganondagan. I used to live right on top of the hill there at the intersection of County Road 41 and Route 332, or County Road 41 anyways. And this tree that was in the front yard cast a very large shadow, and you know, I would see birds walk into it. This is more a winter scene. I'm looking at this now with when there aren't leaves on the trees and there are very few, there's only dried leaves on the plants around it. And I went from making bags, I went from picking up bags and using and recycling bags to making bags out of handmade paper. And I worked with a paper maker in New York. I could select the fiber I wanted to use. Maybe it would be 100% cotton, maybe it would be manila and cotton, maybe it would be linen, whatever the fiber I wanted to work with. And this paper maker would produce sheets for me. I would then fold them and score them and create bags of my own using the same sort of design pattern of paper bags. So this is what this is one. This is one made out of handmade paper. In this case, I didn't create the paper. I found it and really liked it. It's kind of a challenge because it has ribs in it. And so those ribs have to be considered as I put out any design into it. Let's see the next slide, please. In 1978, I was living on the Allegheny Territory. It was not a great time period in my life. I had been ironworking for a year. I had got off the iron and went to Allegheny to run an organization. At the time, we called it the Seneca Nation Organization for the Visual Arts. Um, Unfortunately, I took along with me some bad habits from my ironworking days, and my drinking got to be a problem, my use of alcohol. And I was hanging around with friends who enjoyed a few beers, and so I was kind of at a low point, and I was not entirely in agreement with the direction my nation was taking. They were taking a course toward, um, enterprises. I was wrong, actually, because they've become very important to our economy, but this was how I was feeling at the time. So I called this one Riderless Horse. And although we didn't live in teepees, I did that just to indicate kind of the occupation of people in the background. But these are the hills of Ohio, what we call Allegheny in English. Riderless Horse. The only painting I really completed that whole summer of 1978. I heard the other day that there were two kids that came into the gallery and they asked their mother, first thing they said to her was, "Why is that horse so sad?" And I said, "They got it, So the idea of my show is to help people see. Well, they saw that from a piece of art, that you could depict the feeling even using a horse. And I kind of like that idea that they got it. Okay, the next piece, please. This was put together by a friend of ours by the name of Marissa Corwin. And she titles it The Indigenous Cultural Iceberg. The reason why I like it is because at Ganondagan, we have the challenge of working with fourth graders. They are one of our biggest audience. But we also have the people who come and visit, tourists and others who come by. And we are trying to educate the public, always. That's what we're doing. Interpret our story, the story of the Onondaga, the story of the people called the Seneca, and the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, and later the Tuscarora. We can either tell a very sketchy story in which we just get into weapons, tools, housing, plants, sporting equipment, maybe a little bit of artistic creations, but we don't go into the individual stories, the belief system. We don't get the chance to talk about the history of injustice. We don't get the chance to talk about the values of our community. We may not get the chance to explain our clan system, the significance of the imagery in our regalia or in our art. We may not get the opportunity to talk about traditional stories and objects and characters that help to fulfill that story. We may not get to genealogy to talk about that. We may not get to the indigenous knowledge that our people have about our environment, about the plants and the trees and the creatures that live here with us. So all of that is what really is the fuller picture. And unfortunately, we have a limited amount of time with our visitors, and some have a limited attention span. And so we have to just try to get in as much as we can. But Marissa perfectly illustrates the depth of the story that we need to tell. And one aspect of that is through our art. Next slide, please. This is a drawing I created related to our creation story, the Iroquois creation story. In this creation story, there are two twins that go about making the earth. And one twin is very capable of creating things, including humans, including very useful plants, and including, animals and so forth. And the other twin is quite destructive, is always trying to destroy the things that his brother has created, kind of out of jealousy. And he hasn't got a good mind. And one of my traditional teachers says, not only does he want to destroy the things that our creator has made, but he would like to see us destroy ourselves. And this is the challenge, is to not allow ourselves to become a victim of some of the things that have been placed here that we could fall victim to. And so at one point, while they were battling each other, the creator, the one on the left-hand side of the screen as we look at it, he called upon the power of earthquake. And a little bit, that's what I'm trying to grab here in this particular drawing, is to say something about this idea of the earthquake and him calling upon the power of it to help him to deal with his brother. And his brother's, not a good mind, let's say. And we still deal with that today, in each and every one of us. There's this battle going on for the good, and sometimes the negative kind of creeps in there, takes over. Okay, so the next slide, please. Oh, we're getting to Jamie's work. So I thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about my work today. And I want to turn it over to Jamie and let him explain more about his work and his inspirations. Ganito.
Hello, Peter. Yahweh for introducing me, and Yahweh for including me on this talk here about artists and their work. I believe just 4 of my slides are inputted into your slideshow, so I think you might have more slides left after my 4 here, but I'll kind of interject here and give you a little bit of a break. My name is Jamie Jacobs. As I was introduced at the beginning of the program, I'm a Tonawanda Seneca Turtle Clan, and I work at the Rochester Museum and Science Center. I've worked there since 2006. I do quite a bit of work throughout the museum, and most of my work I do is behind the scenes. One of my favorite things to do within the museum collections is to look at the objects that are within the collections. The years that span throughout the museum collections date back as far as, I think one of our oldest objects is about 8,000 years. So within this time period of 8,000 years ago to present, there are thousands upon thousands of objects that were either excavated, privately collected, or gifted to the museum. And this overall collection makes it quite unique in the fact that it all relates to one group of people, which are the Seneca people. So in the Northeast and maybe even the country, it has the best and most different collections of one group of indigenous people to North America. So growing up in Tonawanda, Tonawanda is a traditional community. We still retain our traditional form of government, which most people call or refer to in English as chiefs. We also have our matrilineal way of life still living, meaning that everything that we inherit as community members, we inherit from our mother. So my last name is Jacobs, but my Seneca name, I inherit that from my mother. So my mother has that right to give me my name that I carry throughout life. So within Haudenosaunee culture, women have had a voice and have had rights since the beginning of probably our time as Seneca people. So it's quite amazing that whenever we speak of this idea of, women having rights and the right to vote and making their way up in society, that has always been the case within Haudenosaunee and Seneca society. So one of the things that the women were responsible for was making sure that the family, the children, are all safe, kept warm, and are prepared for one thing, and that's to ensure the survival of the community. And that's a heavy responsibility. And if we talk in today's terms, that sounds kind of, it sounds kind of, like patriarchy. Like they're supposed to take care of the man, but that's not the case. It's actually opposite. So in our culture, that's a very honorable position. And we're not saying that in the sense that we're trying to pull the wool over the people's eyes. It's the fact that women have that's how they have gained that right to speak and to have that voice and to have the right to name their children and the right to have a say over the land, have a right to say over the community. So one of the things that, as a result of this, women artists have become very, very revered in Haudenosaunee culture. They have created a lot of the artwork that we see in the museum collections, from basketry to porcupine quill embroidery, beadworking, to finger weaving, weaving yarn into textiles, and also to the language that we have. So what you're looking at is a picture of porcupine quillwork. The colors, the purple, the white, the yellow, those are all derived from a living being, which we call the porcupine. The porcupine is covered with these sharp needles on its back. And those sharp needles, the natural color of them is white. And what our Seneca ancestors used to do is they would dye them different colors using natural dyes. They would soak them, and because once you soak them, they become more softer and pliable, and you can actually bend them very easily. And then when they dry, they become stiff and hard again, and they retain that flat shape. So what happens is the Seneca women figured out this art form, thousands of years ago, and they kept it going for generations and generations. And they did that by teaching the younger generation. The younger generation would honor the older women for this, and the older generation, the women, would honor the younger generation for keeping it going. So what you're looking at is a combination of different ideas and motivation that I had used while sorting through these thousands of objects, not only from the RMSC collections, but from collections in museums all over North America and over into Europe. Some of the collections I did not physically see in person, but I did analyze photographs of original pieces that date back probably to like the late 1600s, all throughout the 18th century, right up until when porcupine quillwork dies out in the early 19th century. So one of my inspirations was that when I first began making these objects, I really wanted to honor the ancestors. So what I started doing was the reproduction work. I thought that flattery was, or I thought that by recreating an object to the T, that I was honoring the ancestors. But then I figured out that artist expression is a combination of all things. So what I did was I only started using the artist or the ancient artist items as just inspiration on technique, construction, sometimes colors and design. And then what I would do is I would, instead of reproducing something to a T, to a mirror-like quality, is I started to input my own ideas, my own colors. And I started to use my own my own creativity and blended the two together. So you blend history with contemporary work based all on the culture and what was done for thousands of years. So even though this is an old art form, it's still living, it still takes its own life, and it's still evolving. So my ancestors didn't traditionally use the color purple. So what I did was I used designs that were done in original colors, which were usually red, white, black, light blue. And instead of using those traditional colors, I used contemporary colors, such as this vibrant, deep, rich purple that you see here. So if you look at a piece from the piece that's down in the lower corner, the kind of looks like a wallet or a purse type object. That's actually based on an original object, the construction, the size and the shape, the folding flap. That's used, that I use that from a design and construction ideas from a piece that's in the RMSC collections. But what I did was I changed the color of the quill work, and I changed all the layout of the design that the porcupine quills that you see. So instead of having beadwork and instead of having red porcupine quills, I actually used purple. Purple is one of the main colors of the Haudenosaunee people. And one of the reasons is that because we utilize quite a bit of quahog shells, and we make those quahog shells or clam shells, if that's how you identify them, is we use them in the form of, we make beads out of them, sacred beads called wampum. So there's only two natural colors to the quahog shell, the clam shell, purple and white. So we only have two colors of beads, sacred beads, white and purple. So a lot of the Haudenosaunee people identify with the color white and purple. And that's what I thought here, was that I could use old designs that would identify our ancient ancestors, but also to the taste of contemporary Haudenosaunee people using purple and white. So that's what these pieces are here. The pipes, the smoking pipes. Today, smoking has taken a different idea and connotation, whereas to my ancient ancestors, it was about sending prayer through the tobacco smoke. In fact, the tobacco that we use isn't the same tobacco that is used today for manufactured tobacco or cigarettes. Obviously, they weren't processed through machines or factories. The tobacco that we grew was all hand grown, harvested, and it was done in such a way that when we did grow and harvest tobacco, that it was a sacred ritual, it was a sacred thing. And that's why the tobacco, when we smoked it, we were more interested in the smoke that carried our thoughts and prayers to wherever it is that we were sending them to. So obviously Europeans come along and they adopt the idea, and it becomes more of a commodity and a bartering item was tobacco, and then it just grown into what we know now. So we have natural tobacco that was grown in this area. Like I said, it's not the same tobacco that's in cigarettes. So this idea here, so this set here, the two smoking pipes, and then the pouch is for the tobacco. So it's a smoker's companion type set here. So it's edged with beads and two brass hawk bells. So those little bells, Europeans used them as a trade item. They brought them from Europe and they traded them to the Seneca people, the Haudenosaunee people, and other tribes throughout North America. So they are reproduced. They are handmade. So I thought that I would, again, kind of put a little bit of that historical DNA of when tobacco becomes a trade item. So it's kind of an homage and a reminder to that time period. Next slide, please. Peter had requested that I input a different form of art that I took part in throughout my life. As I was introduced, in 2000, in the year I had graduated high school. And I was an artist in high school. I did a lot of drawing and I did a lot of painting. In fact, that was one of my majors when I graduated high school, was art and science. So I took every science class in high school and I took every art class. In fact, I probably took more than I should have. So I had a lot more art credits than I ever needed to graduate. So after high school, I didn't really want to attend traditional higher education institution. I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew is that I wanted to do something creative. So what I did was I signed up for this school out in Phoenix, Arizona. So at the age of 19, I left everything behind, my family. I left behind I left the area and moved to a totally different environment that I was not used to, which was the high, dry desert of the Southwest United States. I had attended the school. I took I took every class that I could at this school relating to Harley-Davidson manufacturing and Harley-Davidson technician. So once I graduated, again, I did not want to follow the traditional path of working in a dealer, changing tires and cleaning up oil. I wanted to be creative. So what I did was I found a custom motorcycle shop, and that's where I wanted to be. If you all can remember, in the early 2000s, there was an explosion of reality TV dealing with the manufacturing of custom handmade motorcycles. And this was just coincidental because prior to me going to this school and my interest, there was only probably one show on TV. And then after I graduated, this explosion of all these different comical characters appeared on the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, and then coincidentally, it just kind of, it really fed the market in which I was going into, which was, producing, custom motorcycles. So the picture that you see here is a custom motorcycle that I had built from the ground up. And it has different qualities of the time that I had built this motorcycle. I actually built this motorcycle for myself. And I designed everything on the motorcycle right down to the paint job. So the realistic flames, the color, the base color of this deep, rich red. Red is an important color of indigenous people, not just in North America, but all over the world. The people who lived in the caves, cave art is all done in this red ochre. Red is the color of life. I'm assuming was used because the blood that runs through all humans is red, no matter what color the skin is. So I decided to use red as a base color. And again, I designed the seat. The seat is covered and upholstered in alligator tanned brown alligator skin. Again, I wanted to use something natural from the environment, a living being. That's why I went with that. And I wanted to use something exotic because that's the look of the bike. It has an exotic look. It doesn't look like anything traditional out of the Harley-Davidson factory, because all Harley-Davidsons come with leather seats. But I wanted to go a step further, and I wanted to use something that had a lot of character, that has ancient character, and I wanted to use an ancestor, which is the alligator of North America. So again, I wanted to become an artist of all different art forms that people just were not used to, especially within my community. So this is how I ended up in this line of work. I don't do as much today. The market has changed, but also my taste has changed. Now I do porcupine quill work. So I went from drawing and painting to welding and fire and paint and chrome, and then I eventually went into porcupine quill work, and that's what I do now. So next slide, please. This is a bag that I had recently produced, and I entered into the prestigious show that takes place at Ganondagan every year. And I was very happy to announce that this bag won the best of show. When I was designing this bag, the face that you see here is completely covered in all quillwork embroidery, which is not an easy thing to do. It took me many, many, many hours to, produce just this front piece, the front face of this bag. Quillwork takes twice as long as traditional beadwork because I hand dye all my own quills. And contrary to belief, I do not use live porcupines to harvest quills. So I don't have live porcupines in my backyard that I harvest quills from, because a porcupine is just not going to let you pick off these quills while it's just sitting there. So I harvest quills in many different ways. I do know people that harvest porcupines, because some areas porcupines are just so numerous that they get into people's gardens. Sometimes they're found on the roads by roadkill. And then sometimes I order them from trading posts, people who just hunt and trap porcupines for a living. But I dye them all myself, which is very laborious, very labor intensive. I want the colors to be just right. So that's why I dye my own quills, because I want my own colors and not somebody else's. So finally, once I dye all the quills, I sort them so that all my quill work is consistent. And then once I sort them, then I can actually start the process of embroidering them. And embroidering porcupine quills, especially with this front face, the technique that I use, I have to use 2 needles and 2 threads at the same time, which is, like I said, it's very labor intensive. So with 1 inch of quill work, I have to use 2 quills for 1 inch, and I have to use at least 20 stitches just for 1 inch, so 10 on each side. So 1 needle on one side and 1 needle on the other side. So you can imagine here that this bag I produced it so that it would be large. So you can just imagine how many hours was spent just on the quill work itself. And then the edge is quill work. So when you look at the color around the edge, that's all folded, embroidered porcupine quills along the edge. The handles are made with caribou hide. Caribou are animals that were relied upon of the indigenous people further to the north of Lake Ontario and the upper Great Lakes. Rituals took place all around these great caribou hunts. So I wanted to incorporate caribou into this bag, because the main base of the bag is from buckskin, which is what the Seneca people relied on, because they just didn't have availability of caribou in the area. But because I really look up to the caribou, I wanted to incorporate porcupine, as many animals that are native to the northeast in the forest as much as possible. So the red tassels on the bottom are the hair from the tail of the deer. So the deer hair, the white-tailed deer, I dye my own deer tails for these tassels. The cones, the bangles on the bottom, I hand cut and shape all by hand. So they're all consistent. They're all of the same tin type metal, because these tin type bangles were produced in the 18th century by Seneca people and were used on a lot of items, because when they bangle and tinkle together, the sound that they make was very satisfying to the ear of the Seneca people, and they really liked the sound. So it has, again, handmade trade hawk bells on the top of the handles, and the design incorporated within the porcupine quillwork itself. So I wanted to use the natural colors. So we have a red background, we have black and white bordering the main design, and then we have these 2 type crosses on the actual face. They're not religious crosses. What they represent are the different directions that we have. So we have north, south, east, and west. So the 4 cardinal directions. And again, it can be very confusing sometimes to see a cross because we see it with eyes that we are influenced by. Some people are heavily influenced by religion, Catholicism, Christianity. But in this case, it's most likely motivated. The original maker was most likely motivated by the 4 cardinal directions. Next slide, please. This is the back of the bag, so the same piece, or well, it can be the front or the back. It all depends on the user. So I decided to go with a traditional design for the back, which is the Thunderbird. The Thunderbird is a mythical character that shows up in all groups of people who lived around the Great Lakes, even out into the Western tribes. The Thunderbird was the personification of thunder and lightning. So you can see on the bottom, he's flying over the earth. We see the earth and the roots going into the ground. We see the mountains on top, and we see this like spike design, which represents the jagged edges of the earth. And that's what I wanted to represent in this bag. So as much of softness that I inputted in this bag, I also wanted to put rough edges, jagged edges, because the eye seems to focus in on jagged edges. If our edges are softer, then our eyes roll over those soft edges a lot easier. But the artist usually intends that when we have soft, hard, straight, jagged edges, that's what catches the eye. So just like in the environment, if there's something soft, you're going to roll right over it very easily. But if you have a soft or if you have a hard line, you get stuck on that. So our eyes and our minds tend to do the same thing. So again, this edge here is with glass beads and porcupine quills. On the opposite edge you saw was just porcupine quills, where on this side I decided to input glass beads with the edging. So Senecas used to make this style of handbag, but in the 18th century and into the 19th century, it seemed like that they would do flat bags. And sometimes, very rarely, would they do two-sided quilled bags with this well in the middle, so you'd have more space. So I wanted to do an homage to this technique of my Seneca ancestors, but they used to do rounded bags. I wanted to do a square bag because the square bag was the shape preferred for the 18th century. So this has a design, the construction elements from the 18th century, the 19th century, and then because I use materials from the 20th century and the 21st century, it has design elements from these time periods at which I just wanted to incorporate that would include everybody. So it has, my own taste. This design here is not design that was reproduced. It's my own design, and my own techniques. It does have a lining in it, so it has a black velvet lining, which is also catches the eye, because when you look on the outside of the bag, it's very bright, it's very vibrant, but then the inside of the bag is just dark and black. And I just wanted to use black velvet because it seemed to be that Seneca people always liked using a darker background, but instead of the background, I put it inside the bag. And that's the explanation that I can come up with when I put a lot of thought into this bag. So the leather is all hand tanned leather. It's not commercial. No commercial methods were used in tanning any of this leather. So there's not a lot of commercialized materials within this bag. Even the brass hawk bells are handmade from brass by a silversmith. I'm not a silversmith, so those bells I had hired to make specific for this bag. They're based on trade bells, the hawk bells from the trade era of the late 1600s, early 1700s. So I decided to put them on the handles, and again, just for that sound. and that sound that they make when they jingle. In fact, it's the same idea that we hear of jingle bells in Christmas time, right? When everybody hears jingle bells or bells jingling, that's what it reminds them of. It's the same idea, the same principle of the Seneca people. Obviously, it doesn't remind us of Christmas, but it also reminds us of the sound that invokes spirits and the ancestors. So that's the explanation behind this bag here. And I believe that's all the slides that I had. Is there a next slide? So I think, Peter, this is where you kind of explain the outlay of your exhibition at the MAG.
Yeah. So thanks, Jamie, for that, for sharing all that about the making of that bag and what motivates you, to do that work. To, as you said, to pay homage to the ancestors, to the people who developed these ideas and made them originally. I guess in a way, my art is a departure from our strict tradition, but my art is really motivated by my observation of the natural world. And we have, Jamie and I, we have I guess we call it an address, where we give thanks for the gifts that the natural world provides us with. And we say in our language, Dewa Danonyo, or giving thanks. And so this is kind of the direction that my art takes, is one of observing the gifts of the natural world that our mother, the earth, brings forth, and then capturing them in a medium which is paint and canvas or paint and paper. And in this one here, this pair of paintings that are they kind of have corn and they have water emblem. This is very early on when I'm really just beginning to become more of an observer of the abstract art or the abstract nature of our environment. And then in some cases, my work is really abstract, just color, like that blue painting. It's really just color. I'm not going to belabor this. Can we see another slide just to give people an idea of some of the other things? So this is a close-up of that same idea. The one on the right is called Hollyhock, and the plant is probably misnamed, but the blossoms before they have opened. This is the seed pod, and it's going to open and will blossom on the right. On the left, these are what the people call tiger lily, and I just captured them growing around a pond on my son's property. And I just like the contrast of this very brilliant orange that they can be against the color of the sky reflecting from the water of a pond. Next slide, please. The crows have fascinated me for a long time, and you see 4 examples of me using this crow as a symbol. The green painting in the background is owned by the Rochester Museum and Science Center, and I'll just talk about that one briefly. It's called At the Border, and our people are on both sides of the border of what now is called the United States and Canada. But we pre-existed before these 2 countries came into existence. Yet we have to present identification for us to cross between these 2 countries. And one thing that we try to retain is the right to have duty-free passage between these 2 countries. Again, because we were here from time immemorial, and the border for us is the Niagara River. It's a river. It's in another case, it's the St. Lawrence River, but it's just a river. And now there are 2 countries there, and they both want to control over us, control the native people, and make us do things according to their laws. We live with that all the time. And in a way, probably people find it hard to believe that I would still be objecting to that. But I do that sometimes we get harassed at the border. Our people are harassed at the border, and you're really at the mercy of the border guards, you know. But I want to point it out that the crow looks the same on either side of the border. The dandelion looks the same on either side of the border. Next slide, please. And I know we're coming to the time period. We're almost out of time. So I want to take the moment to thank Lauren and thank Jessica from the Memorial Art Gallery, who've done such a great job of pulling together today's talk and also pulling together my exhibition and you know, the publicity that has gone out about the exhibition. I think it's an interesting installation because it contrasts some 19th century art with the art that I've been producing, or I should say my 20th century art with 19th century art. And so I think it's an interesting juxtaposition to see. I like the space where it's installed, and I hope that each and every one of you out there will make some time to visit the Memorial Art Gallery exhibit. My exhibit will be up way into November of next year, excuse me, of 2021. It will still be up. So there's a lot of time to find your way there, to check it out. And I'm going to turn it over at this point to Jessica, I think, who may want to wrap it up.
I'll wrap it up. No problem.
Okay.
So much, Peter. Thank you so much, Jamie. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your artwork with us.
Welcome.
And yes, absolutely. I mean, Peter said it better than I could have, but definitely come and see his exhibition. It will be open through November 8th of this year. And thank you all for attending. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.